All right, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm your host, Charlie McGrath, still the 27th day of December, Thursday. And, get ready for some fireworks, at least to start off with, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff, and then I'm going to bring on Ellen Brown. It's been a little while since she's been on the program, but if you remember the last time she was on, we were talking about public banking. We might get into that a little bit. I know that I contacted her to get her on this time to talk about this fiscal cliff debacle, but she's also going to share some information on the Sandy Relief Fund. But let me give out her websites right away because I neglect doing that enough. Webofdebt.com is where you can find her most recent articles. You can purchase her books that she's written. Her latest one, Web of Debt. She's working on another one now. But outstanding work and just a real great resource for Wide Awake News Radio, and we're glad to have her on here. Now, I put out a video last night that had that touched on the fiscal cliff, and in fact, I turned down a couple RT interviews today that wanted me to come on and talk about the fiscal cliff. I couldn't fit them into my schedule today, and I see where we're at as being yet another extension of crisis. This is a sales job that our government is perpetrating here. They're selling us on the fear of going off this cliff. Now, real quickly, and then I'm going to bring Ellen on. We got here by the same fear tactics that brought us the bailouts, that brought us never-ending stimulus, that brought us never-ending debt on the backs, of the people of this country. We got here to the fiscal cliff most recently in 2011 when we had a debt ceiling issue. And be rest assured of this, it's all about the debt, all of it. This concern about not getting paychecks, concern about, the economic world's going to come to a grinding halt. That is fear tactics. Those are, as far as I'm concerned, financial terrorist tactics used in order to manipulate a population to support the insanity of throwing more debt on the backs of the people of this country. We got here to this edge, to this cliff, because in 2011 we had to raise the debt ceiling. Well, it's almost 2013, and in fact, Timmy Geithner today said by the 31st of December, we will need to raise our debt ceiling once again. This is what it is all about. In 2011, they couldn't get the deal done, so they came up with this solution. They were going to eliminate the members of Congress, take them out of the picture completely and totally, even though the Constitution implicitly gives the responsibility of money and spending money to the Congress. We got rid of it. We narrowed it down to a super Congress. They came up with a no deal, except that raised the debt ceiling. That was the deal that got done, the number one important deal that got done. They raised the debt ceiling. They took us from $14 trillion to $16 trillion in national debt. And if they couldn't come up with the way to cut our spending and increase our revenue, then we would be entered into what is known now as this crisis called the fiscal cliff. This is where we're at. Tim Geithner, the 31st of December, is telling the people that it is going to be pandemonium if we don't raise the debt ceiling. Anything else and everything else, in reality, is absolutely meaningless. They want to increase the ceiling so they can, put more and more debt on the backs of the people of this country. And a real quick illustration of the insanity of this never-ending debt cycle. This is real quick over the last 12 years. We went to Dow Jones 10,000 points in the year 1999, so slightly over 12 years. 10,000 points, 1999. In the last 12 years, our national debt has went from $5 trillion to pushing $17 trillion. Now, our Dow Jones, it was at 10,000 points in 1999. It's at 13,000 points in the year 2012. Do you see the disparity? If we're going to use, we're supposed to believe that we're on the road to recovery because the Dow has recovered a bunch of its losses of 2008. We're sitting at 13,000 points. But if we were going to use the same metric as our national debt, how it has expanded and exploded from $5 trillion to nearly $17 trillion, and this money was really being funneled back to the people and being used to build a sustainable, vibrant economy, then our Dow Jones would go from 10,000 points in the year 2000 to somewhere north of 50,000 in the year 2012. But that isn't the case. We're expanding debt. because we're expanding our military industrial complex around this planet. We're expanding the security industrial complex inside our own borders. And this money that we don't have, that we're borrowing, we're putting on our future prosperity and our children's future prosperity must be stopped. It must come to an end, this corrupt finance system that absolutely dominates Washington, D.C., and truly is the ones represented in Washington, D.C. Ellen Brown, welcome back to the program. Thank you very much for coming on here. You heard what my take is on. You heard my take on the fiscal cliff. Am I right or wrong? I mean, this is just another fear tactic.
Oh, totally. It's another fear tactic. I just might have a little different slant than you do on the debt itself. I think we need the debt. We don't need the interest part of the debt. If you look at a chart of the growing debt, we've been the debt hasn't been paid off since 1835. In fact, okay, debt is our money supply. Virtually all of our money is created as debt, but bank debt gets paid off. But what doesn't get paid off is the interest. The only debt that doesn't get paid off is the federal debt. That just keeps going up. And if you look at the base part of the debt, it just goes up gradually. It barely goes up at all. What goes up is that interest. That's the part that is growing exponentially in the last few years, particularly. And you could get rid of the interest part. I mean, my feeling is we need to redo the entire what we think money is and the whole monetary system. But you could get rid of the interest by borrowing directly from your own central bank. Now, ideally, we would own the central bank. Of course, right now, the Federal Reserve is owned and controlled by private banks. It consists of 12 branches, all of which are 100% owned by the banks in their district. We do not own one share of stock in the Federal Reserve. But assuming we did own the Fed, and there are other countries that do own their central banks and they still don't borrow from them. So you'd have to both own the thing and have the will to borrow from it. We could borrow interest-free from the Fed. That's where our money would come from. I mean, the Fed is pumping money out there right now, so we know that can be done. I mean, they've sort of taken the mask off lately and shown what can be done. We now know that central banks can issue as much money as they want to. Why not let the Treasury itself issue the money directly for its own budget? And then the point at which you need to pull it back in taxes is not to raise the money to spend. You've already spent it. That's what they do every year. They spend it first, and that's why they call it a deficit if they don't have enough in taxes at the end of the year to cover the budget. But if you redid your accounting and said, well, that's the contribution of the government to the money supply, that's how much extra money we need in order to have productivity this year, then it would all balance. I mean, it's all in our minds. It's a construct of our minds that we're desperately in debt. We could be in abundance if we just saw it that way and got rid of the interest. It's the interest that will put us into interest to private banks and private parties that will put us into something.
And has put us, the interest to private parties has put us into this position, right?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think we're in disagreement here. I mean, maybe I stated myself not quite so clearly, but I agree with that. I mean, our Constitution prescribes that. I mean, does it not? Article 1, Section 8?
Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. It doesn't say what the value of those coins are. I actually wrote that in Web of Debt in 2007, but I was quoting somebody from the U.S. Mint writing in the 1980s saying, that we could really solve our budget problems by just stamping out a few very big coins. It's perfectly constitutional.
Yeah.
And put the coins in the Treasury's Federal Reserve account and just start writing checks on them. That's what they do anyway. They write checks.
That's right. You're exactly right. Hold on one sec. We're going to take our first break of this hour. We're going to be back with author, lawyer, and all-around great lady, Ellen Brown of webofdebt.com is her website. We're going to be right back in just a few minutes, guys. Hang tight. Guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, joined by Ellen Brown. Again, her website is thewebofdebt.com. You can access her other works and other sites from that main site. You can check out her latest work, and of course, you can purchase her book, the latest of which, of course, is The Web of Debt. She is working on another one, and we'll definitely get her back on to try to promote that when it's available. I do want to continue a little bit the creation of money. You know, it is everything. People want to believe that or not. I mean, it's a little bit shocking that most people, I talked about this in the first hour a little bit, we were led through all this crisis, all these extraordinary measures that we're taking, all these powers that were given to the Federal Reserve to act in the name of saving our economy. You know, and most people, and I don't want to, I hate throwing out blanket statements like that, but truthfully, most people don't care. They don't want to hear about the creation of money. They don't want to hear about monetary policy. I mean, you know, the people that did, they supported Ron Paul because he would, you know, he had the courage to speak to these things. But most people, you know, if they got a job to go to and they can pay their bills, whatever, they don't want to pay attention to the big words that are used. And it frankly, in a lot of ways, it's kind of boring. But it is the most important thing. I mean, we have to get up every day, and we have to interact in an economy, and we have to spend these Federal Reserve notes, and we have to go out and earn these Federal Reserve notes. We kill for it. We die for it. I mean, if you have a nation, if you have, you know, our planet is run by economies, and we all function in an economy. And if you have, you know, all this power shuffled into the hands of private institutions that are not bound by we the people, well, guess what? They run everything, and we will feel the results of that. Now, I mean, the Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution does prescribe that Congress coin money and determine the value thereof. But I think you nailed it when you said, you know, we can make a $1 trillion coin. And you know what? It doesn't have to be made out of unobtainium or something bizarre or something uber rare. It could be made out of a piece of 1x4 number 2 pine. This has been done throughout history. The English, for 700 years, I believe, Ellen, you'll square me away because you're a historian, used a tally stick. This was an actual piece of wood. They split in half, put notches in it. It was determined to be worth a certain amount of money, and their economy was just absolutely fine under this system. The Romans expanded to a global empire, not on gold coins, but on copper coins. It's about, you know, currency for the people, is it not, Ellen?
Totally agree. And the reason that tally sticks worked, it wasn't that the tally stick had value.
That's right.
It was an accounting tool. So it was just that they had this accounting system, and it wasn't attached to interest. In other words, wasn't borrowed into existence the way our money today is. Virtually all of it is bank debt. It's borrowed by us from a bank. When we go to a bank to get a mortgage or get a loan of any sort, the bank turns our promise to pay into money. That's the function of the bank, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I mean, we need credit, and we need to be able to monetize our credit, our future promise to repay. But the problem is that the bank makes it look like we are borrowing their money, and therefore we owe them twice as much back over 30 years or whatever as we borrowed. And they get the benefit of all that, and they get to control who gets the loans, et cetera. So it seems to me the system would work if we just acknowledge what we're doing here. It's just a credit system. It's just a system of IOUs, of debits and credits. Make it a public system. In other words, you have this great computer in the sky that just keeps track of who owes what to whom, and you can make the whole thing balance. Acknowledge that the government has a certain budget, things they want to get done, and in order to pay for them, they need to issue these little receipts, which they're entitled to issue under the Constitution, little receipts saying we acknowledge that Mr. Smith has performed X amount of goods and services for the community, and the community will repay that by this little receipt is good for the same amount in trade in the community, which benefited from that service. So that's what the tally sticks were. They were just the farmer might take his produce or at that time they didn't. It was before they didn't have a printing press, and they didn't have actual paper dollars or anything. So you actually paid your taxes in some sort of goods or services, and you could pay them ahead of time, and then you would get this little receipt, and then you were allowed to use that receipt when tax time came around. And really they kept those sticks that were all notched and split in half to make sure that the tax collectors were honest. They wanted to make sure that they got it all back, what the tax collectors were getting from the people. So that worked, and they had a very stable system for 700 years. That even though we think that was the age of the Middle Ages, which we think of as being impoverished, really people worked on average 14 weeks, and that was enough to support their family for a whole year. And the rest of the time, they built cathedrals and did other
great works of art. And exactly. Man, you're right, and we'll get more into this on the backside of this break. We're going to take a break, Ellen. We're going to be back with more Wide Awake News Radio in just a few minutes. Hang tight. Dang it. All right. I was getting great information during the break there, and Ellen informed me that the Sumerians had the longest civilization in history and they used no coinage whatsoever. Ellen, the term set in stone comes from Sumerians, correct?
Right. What they had was an accounting system. So they just chipped it into stone, and they had many different commodities that were all compared with each other, and that's what they did in these stones. They set the prices relative to each other. So you could pay in a certain quantity of rice, and I don't remember that rice was one of them. Wheat was definitely one of them, or a certain quantity of silver. Or, they were all compared to each other, and so what they kept records of was who owed what to whom, debts. They did later in the Babylonian system under Hammurabi. They did charge interest, which was actually quite high. Like it was a third of your crop. If you didn't pay, you were supposed to pay these certain fees, and if you didn't pay them, then you owed a third of your crop, which sounds like a lot. But the thing it was still a third of the actual crop. So it wasn't like you owed $100,000, and no matter what happened to your house, or it was a third of what you actually had. And
that's right. And
didn't know anything.
And looking at the interest-bearing system we have now, you might buy a $100,000 house, and over 30 years you're going to pay $450,000 for it. So yeah, and then we could talk.
Drop down to 50.
Say that again, please.
The value might drop down to 50.
Oh yeah, not unless if you listen to Ben Bernanke, at least pre-2008, home values in this nation have never fallen across the country. So again, another sales job to stimulate a bubble that is now exploded. And the greatest bubble of all, the debt bubble, is the one we're pumping up right now, the sovereign debt bubble. And Ellen, I want to get into that a little bit because we do want to talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff. You heard my opening a half hour ago about that. Give me your take on this crisis event that's looming. I mean, Tim Geithner's out today saying that the 31st is it. We're going to bump up against this debt ceiling. What is your take on the fiscal cliff?
Well, I suspect they will make trouble like they do. I was just reading about I've forgotten who followed Mao in China.
Ho Chi Minh? No, that was
not China. That was Vietnam. Anyway, he said he didn't want to have all this dissension.
Chu and Lai.
Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, he said he didn't want all this dissension. That the most efficient thing was let's just agree and do it. In our system, we insist on. I mean, both parties are trying to block the other one from doing anything. So it's a totally obstructive sort of government. So we're not getting anywhere, and we probably will bump our head up against something painful again, like we did before. But it's totally arbitrary. There's no need for this. We could work it out quite neatly. In fact, in my last article, I suggested 7 different ways we could get out of it. One was the $1 trillion coin idea, which is
I like
I mean,
that
it
one.
might sound off the wall, but it's totally legal. It's there in the Constitution. It's been several economists have looked at it and said, yes, that would work. We should do it. The reason we don't do it is that we've got a misconception about money. It's because the people in control want us to have this misconception. We're not allowed to know that we have the ability to have abundance. We have ability to have everything we can imagine. Actually, as long as we've got the workers and materials, there's no reason they can't get together and build a thing. What's missing is the money. Well, what is the money? Let's just pay them with money, which is something they can then in turn go out and exchange in the community for other things of equal value. That's what money is.
No doubt about it. But and tell me if this sounds a little too conspiratorial for you.
Not for me.
Well, I see it along the same lines, except I don't see that they can't get anything done. I think it's by design that they don't get anything done.
Yeah.
Because first of all, we need to propagate this current system, which is, payola and special interest and, the financial or the special interest in general financing political careers. We have leadership in D.C., both the House and the Senate, that are in these positions of power so long, that they become despot dictators in their own right, deciding what will be voted on, what can be talked about, what's going to come to the floor, what's going to come for a vote. But I also see a more sinister agenda, which is convince the people that government doesn't work. There's a reason why Congress has the lowest approval rating ever. I mean, single-digit approval rating. If you ask the average person, it's because this divide and conquer rhetoric. Yes, but it's it's grinding. The Congress is grinding to a halt. They can't do anything. All they do is quibble back and forth amongst themselves. But every time this occurs, we end up with what? We end up with more executive orders. We end up with more power being taken out of this body of governance, which is Congress, and handed to fewer and fewer people. Every single time we have one of these governed by crisis events that can't be solved with the 535-member body of Congress, we keep hearing the steady drip of we need to have a super Congress. We need to have more executive orders. We need to have fewer people in control of the economy. And the latest example would be, here we go, about to enter the 31st. We're going to bump up to the debt ceiling. We've heard every Federal Reserve Chairman, Greenspan, Bernanke. We're hearing former Federal Reserve President of New York, now Treasury Secretary Geithner, talking about we have to eliminate this debt ceiling. So in a very conspiratorial way, my view is that they want to chip away at the foundation of this country, which is representative government, we the people. And they've done it with the monetary policy, right? In 1913, we no longer have Congress coining money, determining the value thereof, and it's a matter of grabbing power. And they do it incrementally, even though over the last decade it's been at light speed in comparison to the 100 years prior. But does that sound a little bit far fetched to you? That this is a slow incremental destruction of representative government?
Well, I can see it both ways. When I was in high school, I was in student council, and there were 30 people in a room, and it was just impossible to get everybody. I thought, no, I'm not going into politics because it's not possible to get everybody thinking alike and agreeing. I mean, there's just like a divide between what people think. So I can see the problem of getting people together. I mean, it is a problem of democracy in general. But on the other hand, totally, they're taking us down. That when we did get something done was in the 1930s. Because I'm writing about that, I know how they did it. They didn't ask Congress. Roosevelt used the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was a government-owned bank. It wasn't even really a bank. It was a financial institution set up by Hoover. But Hoover was just using it to bail out the banks, like the Federal Reserve is now using its power to print money. And Roosevelt used it to basically bail out the country. So they took this Reconstruction Finance Corporation and made loans to everything in sight that would put people to work and that would rebuild and that would create infrastructure, all the things that would, they were actual physical, real things, not speculation, et cetera.
Right.
So, and it worked very well. And they did that for first in a mere 7 years. They built roads and bridges and dams and schools and post offices, amazing number of things. And they did it really artistically. They hired artists to do these murals like in your post offices. And they had these moving sayings from the Greeks and stuff. I mean, it was a real culture going on. Right. And they did it because, well, there was Jesse Jones was in charge of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. You could call him like the philosopher king of Plato. He was a good man who was also intelligent, and he meant to do well for the country, and he did. And he was quite honest, and Roosevelt gave him a green light, and he just went ahead and did it, and that worked.
I want to talk about that. It's interesting we talk about the Depression. I personally believe we're going to have this realization global depression in the not too distant future. I want to talk about that, and then you piqued my interest with this Sandy Relief Fund. Let's get into that in the last segment as well. We're going to be back with Ellen Brown and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a few minutes, guys. Hang tight. All right, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Ellen Brown is our guest, final segment, talking about great projects during or work programs, stimulus, whatever you want to call it, infrastructure build-out. One thing I think we've seen in this, I believe we're in the midst of what will be known in history as the greatest depression of all time. And I don't like to use the word greatest, but the most severe depression of all time. One thing that's different is in 2009, when we implemented $1.3 trillion, when we add the interest that Ellen and I have been talking about tonight, stimulus package, that money wasn't spent the same as it was during the Depression of the 30s, when we got hydroelectric power all over the country. We got all these public works that were built, the interstate program. I mean, we actually built out a nation, and now we are bailing out corporations, but our infrastructure is falling apart. Ellen, and I want to get into the Sandy Relief Fund because it's a very topical and interesting topic. But do you think we're entering or being led into global depression?
It could well be. I mean, we're actually at the Hoover stage right now where we're just bailing out the banks, and we haven't actually, the money hasn't gotten into the real economy, and that's where it's going to have to get in order to get people back to work and to get things working again. In some ways, it's not as bad in 1929 because that's when it was actually the rich people who were jumping out of windows, whereas now the stock market is holding up. We seem to have this two-tiered economy. So the rich are doing fine, and so it's very hard to, and you don't really see the depression. But the poor, the depression is kind of hidden. The bread lines aren't out in the streets anymore. They're now food stamps, and you see them at Walmart's at midnight on the 1st and the 15th of the month with the mothers trying to get milk for their babies.
Right.
And you don't see that. You don't see the people sleeping in the park with the blankets over them because that's not legal anymore. They're sleeping in their cars, also at Walmart. I understand. I actually have 4 friends who are living in their cars.
Wow.
Apparently, there's a whole culture there. There's upper class and lower class homeless. Upper class homeless have cars, and lower class are sleeping under bridges.
Yeah, well, that's 100% right. I'm in Bozeman, Montana, a pretty affluent city in Montana. A lot of out-of-state money comes in here because of the ski resort, but ski resorts we have around here, and plus it's gorgeous. But in our food bank, this holiday season, they were blown away. They've never seen, and this isn't just happening here; it's happening across the country. People lining up to get necessity items they need to have a decent holiday dinner. Our warming center here in town has just expanded, doubled in size because of the number of homeless that were coming to in Montana. Come about October, if you don't have a warming center or a place for homeless to sleep, then you have frozen homeless people. And
right.
So you're 100% right when you say the depression is hidden. Another stat, going back to 2000 and comparing to 2012, in the year 2000 we had 17 million people that were in the bread lines. In the year 2000, these are the modern day bread lines of the food stamps, and we're pushing 50 million in the year 2012. So this stat, along with the number of foreclosures that are not talked about, the number of people who are on long-term unemployment benefits that will never get rehired because they've been without a job for 2 years, and they just become non-persons. They fall out of the participation roles That's how we get this bogus number of under 8% unemployment. So, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of the depression that's going on that are happening that we'll never see until we join into that category. Like you said, you have 4 friends. And if that happens to us, we'll probably start out at the upper echelon of the homeless, living in a car or an SUV. And, as things get worse, I don't know. I guess you fall down the status, the status of homeless to where you're under a bridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you have a car, there's two levels. There's those with a van where you can actually stretch out versus sleeping in the back seat of a car where you have to kind of, you're twisted up.
It shouldn't happen. It just shouldn't happen in this nation. I mean, it isn't like, with the resources, the technology that we possess in the year 2012, the amount of suffering that's happening on this planet is a disgrace. And, again, back to the beginning of the program, it is monetary policy. It dominates every facet of life, and our current monetary policy and the depths of corruption that permeates it, I believe, is primarily responsible for mass suffering on this planet. Mass suffering. Sandy Hook, elementary school massacre, horrible, horrific event. You had information on a relief fund.
I was talking about Hurricane Sandy. I just wrote an article on it, but I haven't finished. But to get relief from Hurricane Sandy, which is either you go to FEMA or first you have to go to your insurer. You can't get anything until you've applied to your insurer, and if your insurer pays for it, you don't get anything from FEMA. But many insurance companies are denying coverage on these technicalities. It's the way our whole system's set up. Is if you're a corporation, you have to take as much money from your customers as possible and give as little back as possible, because you have to have it left over you have to have profits left over for your shareholders.
That's right.
And if they don't have coverage, then they go to FEMA, but FEMA doesn't give you anything until you've applied for a loan. So if you qualify for a loan, then you have to pay the ordinary interest rate. So what good has FEMA done for you? All you've done is you've had to go out and get a loan from a bank.
So these billions of dollars that we hear about, these billions of dollars that FEMA has provided in disaster relief, is all loans.
Well, the money's going for infrastructure, so they'll rebuild the roads and stuff, but for the individuals have to pay their own damages, and the banks are making a lot of money because the individuals are forced to go get a loan to pay for these damages, and they really don't have any choice, because if they were like figuratively underwater before and now they're literally underwater, they're stuck with this lemon. They have to try to put it back together. There's no way they can sell it. There's no market for these homes. So they have to get loans. So they're in the same position as now the students, that are totally stuck. They can't get a job. Or say these people in their 50s that go back to school, I'm being enticed into thinking that educating themselves will get them a job, and now they've got the student debt on top of the fact that they don't have a job. I mean, they're just stuck. They're gonna have this huge debt hanging over them for the rest of their lives. It's a crushing debt. It'll just keep growing.
Right, and student loan debt has recently surpassed credit card debt, over $1 trillion. In the year 2011, over 50% of the kids that graduated from college had to move back home with mom and dad because there was just no jobs out there, and they're all toting with them, $30,000 to $50,000 in student loan debt. Everything's turned into a profit center, and it doesn't matter if it's glorious and beneficial or absolutely miserable and taxing on the people. It has turned into a profit center. We food stamps, Morgan Stanley, it profits from the issuance of the debit cards in over, I believe, 37 states. To the tune of millions and millions of dollars that they make in profit on the pain and suffering of these 47 million people on food stamps, or a lot of them anyway. Same thing you're describing with Sandy, Hurricane Sandy, and I apologize for the mix-up there.
Well, the other Sandy is very interesting too, but
it's beyond interesting. It's beyond bizarre.
It's bizarre, exactly. I mean, there's something very, very suspicious about that whole thing. But anyway, I do want to just say something positive. This is what I was writing about on this.
That's why I love you, because you always give us some encouraging tidbits.
Well, there's one model that is that if most places in the country you're going to be stuck with this, that you have to just get a loan. But in North Dakota, the one state that has its own bank, they had a huge flood in 1997. And up till then, it was considered the biggest, I don't remember, some sort of disaster ever. And immediately the Bank of North Dakota rushed in, rebuilt the city, did a moratorium on foreclosures, refinanced the student debt refinanced everything at lower levels. They got their money because they were a bank. You know, once you're a bank, you can borrow very cheaply. They borrowed from the Federal Home Loan Board, but they, unlike regular private banks, they actually passed that low interest rate on to the borrowers who were in trouble. So they rebuilt the city and lost very low population compared to the city just on the other side of the border in Minnesota, which was also wiped out, but they didn't have that same sort of facilities for reconstruction. So it seems that the Bank of North Dakota has a mandate to serve the public, and they have the tools to serve the public. In other words, they've got the ability to create credit the way a bank does, but they're doing it for the benefit of the people and not to take advantage of the people the way private banks do, because they're corporations, because they have to do it that way.
Well, and certainly set up to do it that way. I don't know if they have to. You know, this is the model that has led to the creation of eventually this too big to fail elite set of banks that run roughshod over economies, run roughshod over nations. And the North Dakota model, we talked about that on the program before, is absolutely the quintessential happening right here in the United States of America example of what I believe. This should be our monetary policy. Look. Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, these institutions that are above the law, right? HSBC, above the law. They can fund terrorist activity, and people can die because of their acts. Nobody goes to jail. They pay a fine, which is tantamount to 1 month of their net profit. These institutions, it's amazing. And these institutions at this point, Ellen, should be public utilities, right?
Right, totally.
All right, what are we working on next?
We got that sound.
Yeah, we got that totally. I got that sound.
But if you want to get into the other Sandy, if you have any insights into that, I think that is.
I'm gonna tell you, we got about 30 seconds left, but I spent a half hour today. First of all, the Sunday after, when the president was talking to the folks saying this is a horrible event, then turned it into a political stump speech for gun control. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The coverage since then, excuse me, of distraught parents that are all laughing and jittery and giggly before they're
and
on.
The coroner is looks like he's on drugs. Yeah.
It's beyond bizarre, and it's very hard, even in alternative media, to speculate on parents being actors faking this pain. But man, oh man, you can't deny what you see when you sit here and you watch a 22-second clip of a guy laughing and joking around, then ask, am I just supposed to read the card? The voice off camera says, yeah, read the card, and he all of a sudden and then gets all flustered and it's weird. It's a weird situation, and and now we have this onslaught of anti-gun legislation that's following it. You hate to think it's possible for these things to be staged or these things to be fixed events. But man, it's hard to deny what you can see with your own eyes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd almost rather believe that than to me, it's hard to believe that people can be so cruel as to, that a young person could, even a young person who is unhappy, could go out and just kill a bunch of other children. They don't unless they're drugged. I would in every case blame the drugs. They're always on drugs.
Absolutely.
For for mental things. Um,
That was a case in Aurora. That's a case in Connecticut. Psychotropic drugs.
Ritalin or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and another strange thing, was and I don't know, we're running way past her. I don't know. At least I didn't hear the music.
Cut you off.
Yeah. Nobody's cut me off. I'm going to keep talking.
I am told it is time to wrap it.
All right. Well, no music, but all right. Ellen Brown, her website, webofdebt.com. You can access her work there and her other sites that she publishes on and has information on. Ellen Brown, thank you very much for coming on the program. I greatly appreciate it. We'll get you on again next month.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Ellen. Guys, stay tuned for Jeff Rintz because he's probably talking right now as I'm running way along. All right. Well, have a good night. Karen Quinn Tostada tomorrow night. Karen's Corner. I will see you guys back here on Monday. Have a good night. Peace.